Hello and welcome to Community Spotlight. I am one of your hosts, Nicole, and I am very excited to have Elizabeth Dubrulle here with me this evening. Elizabeth is running for re-election to the Goffstown Budget Committee. So welcome, Elizabeth.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Nicole.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited for this.
Yeah.
So let's start off with something easy. How long have you lived in Goffstown and what brought you to town?
So my husband and I moved to New Hampshire in 2002. He took up a job, we were originally from California. He took up a job at St. Anselm College as a history professor. We had a 10-month-old baby. And we moved here that summer. Neither of us were used to New England. It was so hot, and our apartment, we lived on the west side, our apartment didn't have air conditioning. And I remember the first night we were there, we decided to take a car ride because we thought, well, the car at least is air conditioned. So we put the baby in the car. We started just driving around. We didn't know where we were going, and we ended up driving down 114 and coming through Goffstown, and we absolutely loved it. All the way down Mass Road, through the village, we just thought, this is the cutest little town. So 2 years later, we bought a house right outside the village, and we moved here. So we've lived here 20 years this year. I had another baby once we moved there, so both our kids grew up in Goffstown. They went to the schools here. My husband and I got really involved in the community. He was the president of Tri-Town Travel Soccer for many years. I was on the Historical Society. I was really active with my kids' schools and the parents' groups. And then I wrote a book about the history of Goffstown called Goffstown Reborn. And then in 2011, Goffstown had its 250th anniversary. And I was one of the co-chairs for that committee that organized that year. Were you in town then?
I was not. 2015 for us.
Okay, so that was a great year. So it was a year-long celebration. We had concerts and lectures and birthday cake and a gala ball and a parade and a huge outdoor festival with bands and fireworks. And it was a ton of work, but it was so much fun. And it was really neat because the whole community came together that year in just a really positive and terrific fashion. So it was really neat.
I love how Goffstown does that. We go all out for some of these fun things.
Yeah.
So why are you running for budget committee?
So it's funny you said re-elect, because actually I'm not currently on budget. I was on budget before,
yeah,
right?
Okay.
So oddly enough, I miss it. I'm a historian. I'm a historian of New England. I never really thought of myself as a numbers person, but I really enjoyed when I served on it before. And I loved working with the spreadsheets. I loved working with the numbers. I loved talking to the people in the community and people in the town and the school side and having those discussions and helping to make those decisions and being a part of that. So I really loved that. When I joined the budget committee the first time in 2011, it was because some of us had concerns about the way it was going. Mm-hmm. I don't have as many concerns now, although I think there's a few too many people who have automatic votes. And my feeling after 6 years on the budget committee is your vote should never be automatic. Your vote should always be, every vote should be one that you are thinking about and considering, and not just voting because your predisposition is to say yes to everything or no to everything. You have to consider everything. So that's pretty much why I want to be on it.
Sounds like some pretty good reasons to me. What skills or experience would you bring to the budget committee? Obviously, you have some experience on budget committee, but what other sort of skills and experience do you bring?
So I did have 6 years on the budget committee, and for 3 of those years, I was the chairman of the budget committee. So that is a lot, I think, of experience right there. And like I said, we were really involved in the community, so I really know the community. And I know the schools, and I don't mean just people. I mean, I know how things work in this town and what's needed. And I do know the history of the town, not just, the history of who John Goff was, but how have we funded things in the past? What has worked and what hasn't worked in the recent past? So I think I bring all that to the table. Right now, I am a director at the New Hampshire Historical Society. That's my job. And I write budgets and manage budgets for 3 departments. And I'm also on the board for New Hampshire Humanities. and I'm on the finance committee there. So I have more experience with budgets in that regard.
Very good. More experience with budgets than I'd like. So there's a lot of concern among citizens and taxpayers that we need to be making fiscally responsible decisions. So can you tell me what fiscally responsible means to you?
So, boy, I would say to be fiscally responsible, you really have to look at the whole picture. You really have to balance everything. And when I ran before and when I'm running this time as well, I mean, I think I really am conscious of the fact that we're trying to balance services, we're trying to balance taxes. Fiscally responsible means, though, trying not to give into the trap of short-term decision making. You're trying to make really responsible decisions, not just for this tax bill, but for next year's tax bill and the tax bill after that. You also have to take into account the fact that as residents of this community, we have invested millions of dollars in our infrastructure, in our schools, in our buildings, in our parks. We can't squander that because that is a responsibility to keep that for our generation and for the next generations. So I really think you need to balance those two things. I think there are a number of things. I mean, as far as taxes go, I've seen budget committees try and make shortcuts because they're only concerned about that year's tax bill, and it ends up costing us more money in the long run. So instead of giving into this mania for you just say the word tax cut and everybody thinks you're going to save them money, we should actually be saying, is this going to save us money? Is this a good decision? Because that doesn't always necessarily mean a tax cut right now. Sometimes it means putting in a little bit more now so you're not putting in a lot more the following year. So I think that for me is really the heart of being fiscally responsible. I know that when I served before, I always called this the grocery store test. I wanted to be able to, if somebody stopped me in the grocery store to say, why did you support X, Y, and Z, that I had an answer for them, like a reasonable answer that wasn't like hurling spreadsheet numbers and percentages and things that people wouldn't understand unless they were immersed in it. I wanted to be able to say a real life answer and be able to explain things. And when I was served for 6 years before, that's what I did. That was kind of the standard that I held myself to, of being able to communicate with people, explain my votes, explain my decisions. And at the end of the day, I mean, I think I held to that pretty darn well.
I really like that grocery store test because I think it also makes things tangible for the average person that's maybe not immersed in it like the committee. And I really do think that the more people that can understand this in lay terms that make decent sense, the more people are going to be involved in sharing what matters to them. And then that's what our community can hopefully reflect. So.
Absolutely. And you know that from serving on the school board, right? You have to be able to be accountable for what you do. And I have found that when you do your homework, when you really get in there and start having those conversations and asking those difficult questions and doing the research, most of your decisions are pretty self-evident. They're really not nail biters most of the time because the information is pretty clear cut when you look at it.
Yeah, that research and doing your homework is important.
Yes, definitely.
So can you give us an example of a difficult decision you had to make during your time on budget, maybe how you ended up deciding on the way you voted?
So, I mean, like I said, most of my decisions were pretty clear cut. And in general, I should preface this by saying, so I'm an independent. I'm not affiliated with either party. I'm not a member of either political party. On social issues, I tend to lean a little left. On fiscal issues, I tend to lean a little right. You've got 6 years of voting history that you can look at and see exactly how I voted on different issues. I always want to support the town and schools. Sometimes that hasn't been able to be possible, but that's kind of my goal is I'd like to be able to support them. So I think the toughest thing, I'm sorry for that whole preface.
No, good background info.
I think the toughest decision I had, I think it was the first year I was chair, which would have been 2014. And when you're working on these budgets, you're working with, multiple nights, I don't know, probably 15 or 20 meetings.
It's a lot of nights.
Yeah, and multiple, 2, 3, 4 hours a night. And you're talking to all these people, you're gathering all this information, and there's kind of different checks. You tend to triangulate information, right? So you're having discussions with department heads and principals and the select board and the school board and the town administrator. Mm-hmm. And you're having these discussions with people. You're looking at the data and the information. Usually, sometimes there's a written proposal that a department head has brought forward. But you're looking at, okay, how much was spent this past year? And how much was spent the year before? And how much was spent the year before that? And you're evaluating how much of this amount that they're requesting absolutely has to be paid. Like we don't have a choice. We are contractually obligated, or there's a state law that says this amount has to be paid. And how much is something that they're asking for over and above that? And one of the chief metrics that you look at is the default budget. Mm-hmm. Okay, the default budget, a lot of people don't understand the default budget, but the default budget is basically what we absolutely have to pay, more or less. Mm-hmm. So that year, for whatever reason, the town had trouble getting those default numbers to us. And we kept working through usually you get them pretty early in the process. And the school always has them, like from the minute they submit their budget. And the town usually does too. But we were working through our process, and it was a pretty standard year. There weren't any big asks. There weren't any big proposals on the table. So we kept saying, we need those default numbers. We need those default numbers. Yeah, they're gonna get them to us. But we weren't too worried about it. And the night before the budget committee public hearing, I was putting together the presentation, and it must have been in the afternoon actually. And I said, I've got to have these numbers. Like, this is it. I've got to have these numbers. So the town got them over to me. And I was really surprised at the difference between the default budget and the proposed budget. And that's kind of one of the cardinal rules when you're on the budget committee. You don't want there to be too big of a spread, because then you have to really ask yourself, okay, wait a minute. What are we spending this money on? Why is there such a discrepancy between these two budgets?
Because the spread means new spending.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So, I was shocked when I saw the difference. And it was too late to call a meeting of the budget committee because we couldn't have noticed it, and I couldn't have gotten everybody together at such short notice. So I just had to go ahead and present what we had. But then after, as you know, in the public hearing, the public gets a chance to make their comments, and then the budget committee meets. The budget committee has the choice to either meet that night or to meet on the next night. We chose to meet on the next night. So we had the public hearing. It was very uneventful. The budget committee met the next night, and I raised this point. I said, I'm really not comfortable with this spread. And it kind of set off this uproar among the committee. There are some people who agreed with me. There are some people like, but we've worked so hard on this budget and we thought everything was fine. And I was, yeah, but everything isn't fine if it's too big of a discrepancy. And it didn't pass the grocery store test. If somebody asked me, why are my taxes going up this high? I couldn't point to something and say, well, we're going to invest in this, or we're going to do this new project. I would have had to have shrugged and said, well, I don't really know. It was just kind of budget creep. And I wasn't willing to do that. So we talked about it for a long time. It was very controversial. We didn't actually change the budget because it was too late by that point. Mm-hmm. And we took the vote. Do we recommend or do we not recommend? And it was a very split vote. And I don't think the budget passed that year. And for me, that was a hard vote because, like I said, I always wanted to support the town, but I couldn't vote for that budget. And I was really disappointed in my first year as chair, and I had to vote against the budget that we've spent months preparing. But that's the way it was. So that, to me, that was a hard vote. That was, I think, the hardest vote I ever had to take. And I was really agonized about it, both before and after. I was really sorry that the whole thing had turned out that way. But I have to say, the following year, we had our default budget numbers like from the get-go.
There you go.
And I believe we did pass the budget. I think all the other years we did pass the budgets that we had recommended.
Yeah, I can see how that would be a hard decision, but it seems like you did the work and did, what you believed was the right thing for the citizens. So think that's commendable. So in your opinion, what is one of the biggest challenges facing Goffstown?
I would say, I think there's really two. One is definitely setting priorities. We have been under-investing in capital expenses for a very long time. And at some point, that's going to catch up with us. I think we're seeing it this year with the pool, right? The pool situation, we're paying all this money just to keep these pools limping along. And now we're in a situation where, well, we can keep paying all this money, or we can invest in a new pool, which is also going to be expensive. I think we need to get ahead of that. Not with the pool, it's too late for that. But with other big capital expenses, I think we really need to be looking at the long-term picture. We really need to make some tough decisions. For me, it's always going to be health and safety first. Health and safety is always going to be, in my opinion, the top priority. And then education is the second one. Those, to me, I really think that is where town and school, we really need to be putting our efforts and making hard decisions on. So I would say that is one. The other one I would say, I think political divisiveness. We've always had it. Goffstown's never had a time when it hasn't been that way. And in fact, if you'll indulge me for just a minute, one of the biggest arguments we had back in the 1760s was between the Presbyterians and the Congregationalists. The Presbyterians settled on the south side of the river, and the Congregationalists settled on the north side of the river, and they argued for years about where to build the town hall, the meeting house. And it ended up being where Grassmere Town Hall is today. That wasn't the original building. There was another building there before, because someone donated the land. And everybody went, well, okay, if the land's going to be free, then we'll all settle on that. So we've always had divisiveness. But it seems like, just like it is everywhere else in the country, it's getting worse. If I had my preference, town elections would always be nonpartisan. We would not worry about political parties at the town level, because we are a community and we should all, that shouldn't matter to us. And the fact that it does now makes me worried that people are being more influenced by ideology than they are by what's actually happening in our community. So that's the two big issues, I think, for me.
I'll have a really hard one for you next then, considering that especially, is what ideas do you have for addressing these challenges?
That is hard. That is hard.
I mean, you know what the first answer is.
And it's going to take everybody. For both of those things, it's going to take everybody. For the first one, for priorities, we have to do a better job with our CIP program, our capital improvement program. Every year, and I've served on CIP in the past, you get together in the summer, you plot everything out on this spreadsheet of all the sort of big expenses, and you spread it out over 6 years, and then you put it on a spreadsheet, and then you forget about it. And it seems like nobody ever looks at that again. And the following year, you do the same thing, and the decisions you made the year before kind of get erased. And so, I mean, CIP has to be a little bit flexible for circumstances, but at the same time, we need to make a plan and we need to stick to it. So I think that is one area where maybe that could help with setting priorities. For the political divisiveness, I think really it just takes conversation. It just takes talking to one another and sitting down and having those, trying to reach out to other people. And that's one thing I've learned from like the people who I feel like really mentored me in town politics, that you sit down and you talk to other people, even if you disagree with them, and you find out, okay, so where's their common ground? Where can we work? How can we find a compromise here? And then if you understand where people are coming from, you have a much better chance of resolving it. It seems like on the state and the federal level, like that ship has sailed. But I'm hopeful that in Goffstown, it hasn't in this community, and that we can still we've done it in the past many, many times, and I'm hoping we can keep doing it.
Yeah, I mean, we're neighbors. Our kids go to school together, you know.
Right.
It would be nice.
But a lot of that means getting off of social media and having those conversations face to face.
Yeah. So, to sum it all up, why do you think voters should reelect you to the Budget Committee this year?
Well, I hope they reelect me because I do have experience, because I do feel like I'm a moderate and I'm trying to balance everyone's needs. And I think for me, like I said, balancing those needs is a priority for me. But also, when I was on the budget committee before, it was a priority for me. Communication was really important to me. And I tried to, I used to publish articles in the Goffstown News, and I'm not promising to do any of this now, but I used to publish articles in the Goffstown News, kind of laying this all out in real terms so that people could understand, okay, so we have this choice or this choice, and this is what we chose, and this is why we chose it. Because at the end of the day, as elected officials, we have a responsibility to be honest with people and to help voters make good decisions. And it just stresses me when I see some of our elected officials who think their role is to escalate every controversy and make everything worse. That's not their role. Their role is to give good, biased information so that people can make good decisions in their own right.
Very good. So is there anything else that you would like Goffstown residents to know as they go into this election season?
No, except I would say I've always had great faith in Goffstonians' ability to show good common sense. And I still have that faith. And I'm confident, I know we have some controversial things coming up this year on the budget. I'm confident that the people of Goffstown will make the right decisions.
Very good. Well, thank you so much for coming. This has been a great conversation. I wish you the best of luck in the election. And for everyone else, stay tuned for some more Community Spotlight episodes in the coming weeks. Thank you.